We went to the flag lowering and learned a lot about the flag and the flag holding. Met some wonderful people. And I just admire what you're doing here. I think this is the most ambitious Stand Up for Religious Freedom event in the country. I've looked on the website. I know in Connecticut we're praying, but we're not doing much else. And I know that's my fault as much as anybody else's in Connecticut. But this was very ambitious, and I'm grateful to those of you who supported it, both financially but with your time. Because I can see that Deacon's not even here now. He doesn't get to bed before 3 a.m. I know, he told me, and his wife is not happy either, because he's just so busy with this, but it's so important. And what I like most about this festival is you call it a festival because it's not an angry Occupy kind of movement. People aren't angry here. It's hard not to be angry about this mandate, and I'm loving my pin, and I'll be wearing it proudly. But I'm just glad that we're able to move beyond the anger to something constructive of standing up, because our Bishop Laurie, when he opened the Mass for this Stand Up for Religious Freedom, the first Mass of the day, he said, this is a call to action. And that's pretty much the way I feel. I mean, we all should have the bugle that they would use this morning out there to call us to action, because we need to do this. And we need to do it happily and with good hearts. And I'm grateful that you are. There's no of the anti-Obama sense that people predicted these 2 weeks would be about. America had that nasty article in their magazine calling this the anti-Obama festival, not this one in particular. And there were even some bishops and priests that have said that. We can't be angry with them, they just don't understand. But I'm here today. Last night's talk was, as if you were here, one of the angrier talks I wanted you to get to know who brought us this mandate, who brought us, it's not just President Obama, it's not just Kathleen Sebelius, who calls herself Catholic, but one of the strongest abortion supporters we have in government, and who has always, and has taken money from Dr. Tiller, the late-term abortion provider, who met an untimely death, sadly, certainly. But it's way beyond that, and it's Catholics within our midst, people who call themselves Catholics but are pro-choice Catholics. So last night's was kind of harsh, and I know I identified 3 groups that have brought us, that we are at a war with, because we really are, and the bishops have told us we're at war. So we can't be happy all the time, we have to be at war, and we have to be fighting that war. But today I want to talk about some of the good news from the culture wars. And I'm not going to tell you all about my book, but it's a departure for me, because if you've read any of my other books, they're not really happy books. They're usually angry books. And today's gospel, I almost felt like God had put that gospel right for me for that thing I have in my eye. That idea of not judging. Sometimes we have to judge, in all apologies to our Mass celebrant today. We have to judge this. We have to judge this HHS mandate. We have to judge Kathleen Sebelius. We have to acknowledge that we do have that, big stick in our eye, that, we have to be judged too. But today I kind of want to, not judge so much and more celebrate some of the good things. And that's really what my book is about. It's beyond the culture wars. We're never going to get totally beyond the culture wars. We have to continue. Culture is always being negotiated. I'm a sociologist, so I teach about culture. And culture is negotiable. Just because we think we're winning a culture war, and we may win this removal of this mandate, we're still not going to win the culture wars, because culture is always in flux, it's always changing. And the left, the progressives in our church and in our culture, have been winning a lot in the culture wars. Same-sex marriage, they're winning the attitude war in that. We're losing. If you're in favor of traditional marriage between a man and a woman, as our church teaches, you're losing. We're on that losing side. So that war goes on. The abortion wars, as a member of the pro-life community for many years, I feel somewhat encouraged. The Pew Foundation just came out with a 10-point decrease in support for abortion from Mass-attending Catholics. I don't know why any Mass-attending Catholics support abortion anyway, but we're making progress there. In Congress, that's a whole other story. And I don't want to go down that road of all those voters for abortion who call themselves Catholics and who are graduates of Georgetown and all those other Jesuit schools, because I will get angry again. So I'm trying to stay this positive course. But that's why I'm saying the culture wars will continue. So my title, my publisher, I'm published with Encounter Books, he's saying, well, you never really get beyond the culture wars, and that's what I have to do now in this last chapter, really clean it up and say, you know, we are getting beyond the anger sometimes, but we can't ever stop fighting, because the church is always in flux. It's always being attacked. And last night I named the people who were attacking our church from within our church. Groups, this American Catholic Council, Voice of the Faithful, they're trying to change our church by decreasing the power of the bishops, the authority of the bishops. They don't want the bishops to have authority, because they know that we listen to the bishops. Faithful Catholics, listen to your bishop. We may not agree with all of our bishops, and I'm unhappy with some of our bishops, but what I've been doing in this book is to name the bishops that, and who am I to judge, I know. And I don't name them just off the top of my head, but I have lists of bishops that I highlight throughout the book. And I wrote this book with a young Catholic convert, because I didn't think I could write such a positive, optimistic book by myself, because I always go down the road of darkness and anger and, you know, do you believe this? And so the whole chapter changes. I start off happy and end up. So I have this young convert who loves the church so much that every time I went down that road, he'd send the chapter back to me and say, you might want to lighten this up a little. He's like 26 years old, a new convert, and just loving the church. So he was a good co-author for this, and I'm excited to be working with him. But we collaborated, and the way we identified good bishops was to look at what was happening in their diocese, where they were. And we specifically looked at vocations. Good bishops produce many priests. And we didn't come up with that on our own. In 1990, Archbishop Eldon Curtis wrote an article, and I have it here. I don't want to read the whole article to you. But he wrote an article, if I can find it. Oh, here it is. And he said, there's no priest shortage. Now, we kind of know there's a priest shortage. You know there's a priest shortage in Rochester. But he said, don't worry about that priest shortage. In 1996, he said, Crisis in Vocation, that was the title, with a question mark. What crisis? He writes, when dioceses and religious communities are unambiguous about the ordained priesthood and about religious life as the church defines these calls, when there is strong support for vocation and a minimum of dissent about the male celibate priesthood and religious life, when there is loyalty to the magisterium, and when the bishop, priest, religious, and lay are united in vocation ministry, then there are documented increases in the numbers of candidates who respond to the call. We wanted to test that. So what we did, my good husband, he let me buy 10 years worth of Catholic directories. The Kennedy Catholic Directory is produced every year. And they're really pricey. They cost $350 a year. Now I was able to get some at a bargain on Amazon. But every time he gets this Amazon bill, he's like, do you need them? And the books are this big. Last year we used them to hold up our Christmas tree, because we wanted our Christmas tree to be taller, so I put a skirt over like 6 Catholic directories. So we have gotten our money's worth out of them, Dana. But they don't put them online. Nobody seems to want this data to get out. So the Catholic Directory lists how many ordinations by each diocese. So me and my student did year by year from Albany to Youngstown, and I documented how many priests were ordained in that diocese, how many seminarians are in that diocese, 274 dioceses, 10 years of data. And Eldon Curtis is right. when you look at dioceses where there are many vocations, and I wrote an article about this, it's called Called by Name. So I'm not giving away anything from the book, because my co-author would kill me if I gave you inside data that you'd have to buy the book to get. Because when he knew I was talking about this, he says, "Now you're not going to tell him about the book, are you?" Well, just a little bit, because we did write an article. It was in Catholic World Report, and you can get this article online if you really want some of the preliminary data from our study. It was published in December of this year, this past December 2011. And the article is called Called by Name. And we identify preliminarily, like, where there are major numbers of increases in vocations. And there's real good news. We were predicted to have no vocations. I mean, and lots of dioceses still have very few vocations. And in the Wall Street Journal, I identify a couple of those. But there's good news for many dioceses. The urban areas of Atlanta, Austin, Boston, Bridgeport, Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, Indianapolis, Los Angeles, Newark, New York, Philadelphia, Portland, St. Louis, San Francisco, Seattle, and Washington, D.C. have good numbers of. The big winner in this is Bishop Fabian Bruskowitz. You probably are aware of that out in Wyoming. He's got tons, the Diocese of Lincoln, Nebraska. 7 priestly ordinations in 2010. They average between 6 and 11 each year for the past, since he's been there. That's amazing. Now the other side sort of dismisses our data, and they kind of make fun of it and say, well, yeah, where there's a lot of Catholics, you're going to get a lot of ordinations. Well, where he is, there's not a lot of Catholics. In Lincoln, Nebraska, Catholics constitute a small percentage of the total number of people living in the diocese. In Lincoln, there are only 95,000 Catholics, which is 17% of all the people living in that diocese, with a total population of 580,000. In the Portland, Oregon diocese, where they have a good bishop, there were 9 ordinations into the priesthood in 2010, in a diocese where Catholics number only 16%. 409,000 out of a total population of 3,269,000. Not a lot of Catholics in Portland, but a lot of vocations. Now, some people would say, I've got a sociologist friend that says, well, they're in those dioceses, there's nothing else to do, become a priest. Or they're in dioceses, they're in dioceses like Lincoln, there's not a lot of prospects for the future, become a priest. The people with they can't do anything else. I mean, I got that when my son was in the military. People join the military when they can't do anything else, or they don't get into another school. He went to West Point, and when we lived in San Diego, people were saying, is that like a military academy? Why would he do that? And you get this with these priestly ordinations, that you kind of get the losers, they'll say, and that's just not true. When we look at who's becoming priests now, they're better educated, they're younger. We're getting younger priests now. 2011 is the youngest class by 4 years. So it's not people with second careers who don't have alternatives. Not that that was ever the case, but people believed it was. I think, as a sociologist, that one of the reasons that some of these places where there are fewer Catholics is where there are fewer Catholics, you have to maybe fight harder for your faith. Or in a place like Boston, Catholic is part of the ether, and it's no big deal anymore. And in Boston, they almost closed that seminary. But Cardinal O'Malley has come, and things have turned around, and things are much better in Boston. They don't have booming enrollments the way they do in like Newark. Archbishop Meyer is amazing. So they call that a theory of competition. When you have lower numbers of Catholics, that it becomes, sort of special. In Boston, it's not special to be Catholic. In fact, Catholics, a lot of the churches have been turned into condos. It's kind of a sad place. I find Boston rather sad. Other people will say, well, there's no ordinations in places where there's large numbers of Hispanics, and that's true. Hispanic young men don't seem to be joining the priesthood in as great numbers as others, which is kind of a sadness. But in some places there are. Like there were no ordinations in El Paso, Texas, which is kind of a sadness. But in contrast, there are some places where there are large numbers of ordinations, where there are extremely good bishops. When looking at the rates of ordinations, Corpus Christi, there were 7 ordinations, Corpus Christi, Texas, 7 ordinations to the priesthood last year. And Hispanic Catholics comprise more than half of the total population. So it's not true. If just being Hispanic, it's maybe being Hispanic in a diocese where there's nothing else happening, perhaps. Now, it's hard to write this book without making judgments, so we're trying to use the data. But I don't think that we have to, I mean, Christ always promised us priests, and I've always known that. But for Archbishop Curtis, he says the vocation crisis was precipitated and continued by people who want to change the church's agenda. And he said, people who do not support Orthodox candidates who will be loyal to the magisterial teaching of the Pope and bishops, and by people who actually discourage viable candidates from seeking priesthood and vowed religious life. And we did find some evidence of that, but you have to read the book to get all that. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. But if you read Michael Rose's book, Goodbye Good Men, sad book about how Orthodox candidates were actually turned away from the priesthood by psychologists and psychiatrists and feminists who didn't really want a lot of Orthodox men running the church anymore, and they decided that they would take it upon themselves to decide who could be part of them. And we interviewed several men who were caught in that kind of dilemma. So that's one good news. The bishops who are having the most success, I have a list of some of those. What should I do with that? That is well organized this morning. Bishop Vasa, who was just transferred to Santa Rosa, is one of them. Archbishop Chaput, of course. Bishop Olmsted. All of these bishops are highlighted in our book, and almost all of them have something really special about them, in that they are able to inspire young men to follow them. Bishops who are not courageous, who are quiet and have become part of the culture, buying into the culture of feminism and buying into the culture of whatever, the degraded culture, they're not having quite as much success. And we do have a chapter on those bishops, but I don't really want to dwell on them now. So good things are really happening, and we're here to celebrate that. But it isn't just with the bishops, it's with the laity. I mean, this in itself is certainly a wonderful thing. And in our book, we spend a chapter identifying how the culture wars can be won, or temporarily won anyway. We know that they can never be permanently won, but our side can win, the side that wants our church to return to its roots of a strong magisterium, strong authority, strong laity, and things are happening. And I identify several of those, and one of them is this media presence that we're starting to have. And those of you in marketing like Larry, and we are getting a good media presence, finally. I work in an evangelical school, and they have understood that with their mega churches and their television and their preachers. Not that we need a Jimmy Swaggart or a Tammy Faye, certainly. No, we don't want that. But we do want a presence on television. And a couple of things that I just want to bring your attention to that maybe you can support or think about or at least applaud. The Catholicism on DVD, Father Robert Barron. Most people don't know that that was started by Cardinal George, who is one of our wonderful bishops. Now, Chicago, vocation's coming out their ears. They don't know what to do with all the priests. Washington, D.C., the same thing. But Chicago is amazing. And Cardinal George has a lot to do with that. And his book, Simply Catholic, I love, because it reminds me of why I'm Catholic, because you're just simply Catholic. And that's it. He sometimes is a little judgmental about the right, and I take offense at that because I find myself there. And he says, you people, you better be careful too. But he really went after the left. And in the Wall Street Journal, I quoted him because he once said about the left, they're parasitical on a substance that no longer exists. I love that. Don't you love that? The idea of the left being parasitical on a substance. And the left in our church, he said, is parasitical on a substance that doesn't exist. And they really got mad. But in the next breath, at that same Mass that he said that, and he said, and the right is too judgmental. Yeah, I know. Okay, but I'm not a parasite. But this Robert Barron, Reverend Father Robert Barron, did this he founded an organization called Word on Fire. And you kind of want to pay attention to them because they're amazing. How many of you have seen that? Oh, isn't it amazing?
Yes.
It's just, oh,
Beautiful.
I have it and I watch the DVDs whenever I can. But it's just beautiful and it makes you proud to be a Catholic. And he did an interview, Father Barron did, and said he was motivated to create the series because he wanted to show the life-affirming message of the gospel, that God became human, that we might become like God. And most viewers of the series have indicated that that happened. He said that he wanted to address the culture wars, but when you're watching the series, there's no controversy, there's no, oh, those bad feminists and all those pro-choice, none of that. And what about women in the church? He addresses women in the church, but you don't even know that it's being addressed. The way he says it, he says, rather than engaging directly in the hostilities, he proposes a faithful yet uplifting way of looking at church teachings. Instead of lecturing about the reasons why women cannot be ordained as priests, and they can't, Father Barron devotes an entire episode to the lives of the saints and highlights 4 consecrated women religious like Catherine Drexel, Edith Stein, Mother Teresa, and St. Teresa of Lisieux. Giving a nod to the culture wars, Father Barron says, as you know, the Catholic Church is thought to be oppressive to women because women cannot be priests. Well, I wanted to show that real power comes through holiness, comes through sanctity, and the most powerful Catholic figures in recent time were Catholic women. And far from denigrating the priesthood or causing controversy or saying those bad, evil women that want to be ordained in the Women's Ordination Conference, he does this in a nice way, and I need to take a lesson from that. Father Barron said that Pope John Paul had a large influence on his decision to undertake this media project. John Paul had such a savvy idea about the media, about using the media, and we're doing that now. Even the USCCB has this new evangelization project. And that's really our next step after this, is this new evangelization. A second initiative, besides the Catholicism DVD, Word on Fire, comes out of Denver, called Focus. Now, I said terrible things about Catholic colleges and universities. I worked in one for 15 years, and although I loved my students who were so wonderful, I didn't have a lot of pro-life colleagues. I didn't have a lot of support for Catholic views. I loved my school, we loved our church, hated to leave, but they're in trouble. And there's a new initiative called Focus, and that's out of Denver. Archbishop Chaput, before he moved to Philadelphia, you lucky people in Philadelphia. Focus started, it was inspired by Evangelical, Campus Crusade for Christ, a Protestant, more evangelical initiative, and it's wonderful. The schools that have allowed it in, and that's how these schools will change. They're not going to change based on bitter old people like me. And I'm not that bitter or old, but you know, I'm a little angry. They're going to change from the students, the kids who are kind of on fire for the faith. They arrive on campus and they are like invited to a drag show the first week, and they're like, I don't think so. And Focus is a place for them to go. USD, University of San Diego, just had their first annual drag show. So they're not going to be excited by that because they want to be excited by Focus. And Focus is just, it strengthens young believers in their faith. Archbishop Chaput established Focus in Denver, and now it's a national program. A lot of schools won't let them in because they know what will happen. Those students will go to class and they'll have a theology professor that says Jesus was gay, or Jesus was married, or Mary Magdalene was one of the apostles, and he'll say, no, I don't think so. And that's what you need. You need those people in your classroom to keep you honest. And right now, they're so poorly catechized that they don't really know to confront a faculty member that says these things about the divinity of Christ. Jesus was just a regular man. He didn't have any divine powers. That's all been taught on Catholic campuses. If you've read my book, you know how depressing it is. Today, the group has over 260 missionaries, they call themselves missionaries, focused missionaries on 60 college campuses. They have more trouble getting on Catholic campuses. They're on very few. Most of those are secular schools. Secular schools don't feel threatened by Focus, but Catholic colleges do. They say, we don't really need you. There's like a handful, maybe 3 or 4 Catholic colleges, which is sad. They say, we don't need Focus. We've got theologians over here. Yeah. So that's the second one. The third one that I'm excited about, evangelizing the culture, is Catholics Come Home. I don't know if you've heard of that. Do you have it here in Rochester? I don't think so. Yes. Pardon me?
Occasionally I've seen.
Yeah, but like advertisements. But there are dioceses that have the program. Catholic Comes Home initiative has been successful in that. I mean, in the places in the diocese where it's implemented, they're seeing a 10 to 20% increase in mass attendance. Catholics are coming home when they see this. The ads are amazing. Catholics Come Home is a nonprofit organization, an independent that creates effective and compassionate media messages and broadcasts them nationally and internationally in an effort to lead to a genuine enculturation of the gospel. Like Father Barron, this was inspired by Pope John Paul's call to the new evangelization. I mean, he still has such an impact, and Pope Benedict is taking that and also talking about, they use the media, creating inspiring TV commercials and an interactive website. The website's amazing. Without obligation or pressure, Catholics Come Home offer an opportunity to learn the truth about the faith in a non-judgmental atmosphere. As many as 100,000 baptized Catholics in the U.S. drift away from church each year. So this initiative attempts to address this population. Right now, the dioceses that have implemented it, I have a list: Colorado Springs, Venice, Florida, Atlanta, Savannah, Chicago, Rockford, Joliet, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Lafayette, Boston, Manchester, New Hampshire, Winona, Charlotte, Bismarck, Fargo, Omaha, Lincoln, Erie, Providence, Corpus Christi, Seattle, and Green Bay. We did a correlation analysis between the places that have implemented this with the numbers of vocations, and it's a strong correlation. This kind of stuff encourages priests. You look at these places, Corpus Christi, lots of Hispanics, lots of vocations. Just because you're Hispanic doesn't mean you're not going to go to the church. But some people say, oh, don't even bother trying to increase vocations among Hispanics, they're just not going to join. Not true. So our book will address that. As part of the Coming Home initiative, and this is something Rhonda will like, there's a subset called encouragepriests.org, because Rhonda's very grateful for priests, and I am too. I'm always angry at the ones that don't do what I think they should do, but Rhonda's more forgiving than I am. Encouragepriests.org was launched a couple of years ago, and it's a way for parishioners like us all to try to thank our priests. When I wrote my Politics of Abortion book, did you know that we have a National Abortion Provider Week, like National Secretary's Day? And you can order like fruit baskets and muffins to be sent. Well, Encourage Priests sort of wanted to say, maybe we can have not National Priest Appreciation Week, but we should be encouraging our priests at all time. So there's a website that you can go to that helps you figure out what you can do for your priests. And they have little things like cards of thanks. They have an e-card. It's called a collar holler, which is so cute. You can send a collar holler to your priest. So I think we could do things like that. It's very cute. But what the website really is for you to write stories about how a priest touched your life. And I can think of many priests that touched my life. They were there right at the right time, once when I was in high school, later beyond that time, here and there, and they appreciate that. There are written stories and 1-minute video testimonial clips from Catholics who want to share a story about a priest who has inspired them. All of these are wonderful opportunities for, I think, reinforcing our belief that we can make a difference and we can win this culture war, at least for the time being. We can win these battles. I guess we should look at it, winning these battles. There's going to be more battles, more and more. The same-sex marriage thing, things are going to get worse. I hate to be a downer, but they are. In Canada, you can't preach about, even if you're a priest, you really can't preach about the sanctity of marriage anymore without coming before a tribunal in a Catholic church. And we're coming to that. I mean, this contraceptive mandate is just sort of like the appetizer. It's going to get worse, no matter who's in power, because the gay community and the progressive side, they don't want the church to have any power. You saw, I told you last night, and those of you who weren't here, what happened in Connecticut, and that will happen on a national level. Connecticut, if we didn't have Bishop Laurie there, God put him there for a reason, and I think it was to stop this initiative. 2 gay lawmakers, Democratic gay lawmakers in Connecticut, tried to take over the church. They did it by mobilizing disgruntled left-wing progressive Catholics, people like Paul Lakeland, a former Jesuit priest, to say that they wanted more of a voice in the church. They wanted to empower the laity by diminishing the priest's power and the bishop's power. And if their law had gone through, they had it ready to go, and they had a lot of support because there were a lot of Catholics that wanted to take back their parishes. There was great anger in Connecticut because we had several high-profile scandals, financial scandals. This Father Jude Fay in Darien, Connecticut, stole over $2 million from his Darien parish to lead a lavish gay lifestyle in New York City, Palm Beach, Florida, going on cruises, and stole all of the parishioners' money. So Voice of the Faithful members mobilized and tried to take over the churches, and the Catholic churches. These lawmakers wanted to get the laity in charge of the churches and make the bishops and the priests advisors, non-voting advisors in their own parishes, that there would be councils on each church. That could come back. It will. They promised to bring it back in Connecticut, and I just hope we're ready for it. But Bishop Laurie fought it back, and they ran away, the gay lawmakers. But he said in print, as I told you last night, Bishop Laurie said, quoted in the newspaper, they brought this because they don't want our voice, the Catholic voice, to be part of the gay marriage debate in Connecticut. And it was true. They did this just a week before the vote was to be taken, and they didn't want the church to be part of that vote. They won anyway, though. We have gay marriage in Connecticut. But it's going to be national. So we do have to be prepared to fight this fight, and we're so lucky, so blessed. It isn't just luck. I always say luck, but it is blessings from God that He has sent us courageous bishops. In San Diego, we had Bishop Corleone, who fought back the same-sex measures. So there are good things happening throughout the country. I mean, who would have thought that California could fight back against same-sex marriage? They couldn't have without Bishop Corleone. He did it, not single-handedly. In fact, he says the evangelicals really did most of the work. But he mobilized Catholics and he mobilized evangelicals, and together they fought back that we don't have same-sex marriage in California. Now there's a challenge to that proposition out there, but the proposition was voted down because of Bishop Corleone. And he's a very young man, and I'm proud to know him and thrilled that he's there. And there's a whole list of others that you'll read about in my book, if you get my book. It won't be out for a couple of more months. So I think we have to feel hopeful, and that's, I guess, the only message I want to leave with you today, that the fact that we're all here, the fact that I got my husband to drive me 6.5 hours to be here because I was so excited about what you were doing here, I think is so hopeful for our church. I feel more hopeful for our church than I have in 10 years, because it's been kind of a dark 10 years for me, both in my career. I mean, I've been away from Catholic higher education for 5 years. I'm getting over some of the sadness and bitterness about what has happened to Catholic higher education. I've let it go and moved on because I think the bishops are going to address it. There's a lawsuit right now going on against Georgetown University. I'm writing a friend of the court brief for it. It's a canon lawsuit. It says if you're not Catholic, you should take your name off. Don't call yourself Catholic. And Georgetown's going to have to face that, and they have big money behind that lawsuit. It's the producer of The Exorcist, Peter Blatty. I don't know if you know about this. So pretty exciting. So exciting things are happening. So I think we're at a tipping point, if you've ever read that book. I haven't, but I sort of like the concept. I do. I think that things are happening. So I thank you for having me here. I'd be happy to take any questions you have. I'm just sorry we have to leave so quickly after this. Yes?
Yeah, the culture thing, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, it really is.
To start with. This political correctness. The left has instilled that from the youngest to the oldest.
Oh, I know.
And people, good Catholics that I know, are afraid to take a stand because they don't want to offend anybody. What the hell? What do you mean offend? You talk about a nation of sheep. Come on. You don't have to be, as you say, judgmental, but you take positions for crying out loud, consistent with your faith.
You have to defend the faith, and we
Yeah.
have been reluctant to, and our priests have been reluctant to. But I know of priests who've told me that they try to talk about abortion, and people get up from the pews and they walk out. And I said, well, let them, if you're there talking to two people.
Exactly.
Too bad. But I guess he has to worry about keeping the lights on in the church. I know, but you're right, it takes real courage. And in Connecticut, we let that, we're giving out contraception in hospitals, now we're giving out abortifacients. Our bishop acquiesced because he said he didn't have a choice. I said, you go to jail. I mean, I didn't say that to him. I said that in my head. Yeah, it's a great, I'm sorry, your question.
That's okay. My question has to do not so much about culture, but about the way that things come about in the society. And I'll use the example Roe v. Wade. Those of us that were here on Saturday learned that while the Constitution only defines one kind of law, which is the kind of law that is passed by the legislature, that in fact there's multiple kinds of law in the United States. And so my question has to do with judicial kinds of laws. In other words, California passes a referendum that says that we are going to define what marriage is. And the majority of people agree as to what the definition of marriage is.
Yeah, Proposition 8.
Before a judge.
Yeah, and he says, sorry.
And
Goes before a gay judge.
well, okay, I mean, that's not my point. You know, I mean, you can always, you know, on technicality, I want to do something about this. But in point of fact, we have judicial laws, if you will, or administrative laws that redefine the laws of the people. And the kind of law that, in fact, the Constitution authorized government to pass to rule us. Do you have any opinion on when there's a judge that says, here's what I want to be, what should we as individuals, as lay people and so forth, be doing?
We're stuck with a lot of bad judges. Yeah, we are stuck with them because a lot of them are appointed for life. But we have to pray that our next president appoints better judges, and our lawmakers, we just have to pray for better judges. Or else change, I don't know how we could change that system now. The judicial branch is part of the government.
Pieces that we do.
Yeah, there's not much we can do with those existing judges. And in California, the people are beside themselves, all that work for the proposition, and now, but that will be an appeal, it'll go to the Supreme Court, and then that's where we really have to work.
Yeah, well, thank God the Supreme Court is still,
Yes.
as it should be.
And today could be a big day for us.
Yeah, because the Ninth Circuit, they're
Oh, Ninth
talking about,
Circuit, you forget
they're
it.
a joke.
I know, they are.
He's talking about, they're
And
reversed all the
he
time.
didn't have to be a gay judge, it could have been any judge on the Ninth Circuit, you know? Yeah. Yes?
I don't know if you brought this up yesterday, but you know that New York has the same-sex so-called marriage.
Yeah, Andrew Cuomo.
There is a new senator in the New York State Senate who was elected because the person that he was running to had taken that office from. The person who had that office voted for that law and was a Jewish man in a very heavily Jewish district. This man came in and won that seat, and he has introduced a law into the New York State Senate now to reverse this so-called same-sex marriage.
Wow.
That was on the organization, National Organization for Marriage announced that.
Oh, that's wonderful. I didn't know about that.
Yes, that's-
Yeah, Maggie Gallagher's group. Yeah, that's fantastic. I would be surprised. But Andrew Cuomo, that was a big betrayal,
Yeah.
because Cardinal Dolan was personally wounded by that.
Yes.
But
So that's a little helpful, whether anything will happen with that.
but last night, Father Miller asked me what I thought of the idea of withholding communion from politicians like Cuomo who vote for these things. I don't have an opinion on this. I just know that the bishops who have a lot of vocations say that they wouldn't, that they would withhold communion. They wouldn't give communion. I have a listing here. Bishop Vasa, in an interview, he said, it has to do with communion with the Lord. As someone I know said quite recently, is this what the Lord wants you to do as a Catholic politician? If it isn't, then you need to be honest and consistent about that and say you cannot claim a unity with the church, a communion with the church. Denying communion to such a politician is not something I would do casually, though. I would first meet with that individual, offer them a warning, and tell them that their soul was in danger. He's not the only one. That's Archbishop Vasa. Archbishop Semple said a similar thing. Archbishop Olmsted. In a question, an interview, you've stated that Catholic public officials opposed to church teaching should not receive Holy Communion. This is what Bishop Olmsted. Anyone who is not in a state of full communion with the church should not be receiving communion. That would include public officials who take positions in opposition to church teaching involving intrinsic moral evils. The areas most commonly are abortion, embryonic stem cell, and euthanasia. So I have listings of bishops who have come out publicly. Now, people like Cardinal Wuerl doesn't. Cardinal Dolan, I'm not sure about, and I wouldn't want to put him on the map for that. You don't want to, but I am always appreciative when an interviewer will ask a bishop, what do you think about this? Because I don't know, the bishop would know better than I, but I think it causes scandal when an Andrew Cuomo votes for that and then receives communion.
I agree with that. Absolutely.
I think it's a scandal for all of us. Not to punish him. Yeah. Yes, Rhonda.
Are there ways that we can be additionally supportive or helpful to our bishops? For example, just to let them know that if they were to do this or that or take a stance on this or that, even just as you spoke about just this moment, that we would be supportive, that we would understand.
Yeah, I think that's part of that encouragepriest.org thing. We need to write to our bishops. I write to bishops a lot.
Not even just our own bishops,
Yeah.
but to write to other
somebody
bishops
in
around
Oregon
the
that's
country.
in the news because he did something courageous that he's getting a lot of flack about. Like Bishop Olmsted, when he excommunicated that nun, the secular press went crazy. How this poor nun, she's only here to help this woman. What would you do? Leave a woman's children without a mother? And he needed support and he was grateful. He wrote back. I wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal supporting him, and nobody else does because we're not sure. Should we get involved and would it make things worse? Does he really want me on his side? But I'm sort of nobody, so I can be. I'm not like a highly visible person. So I think he appreciated it a lot. You could do that, and you're writing a column. You could do that right in your column. Name names.
I'm even thinking that if were some way, or if you might over time, just think if there were a vehicle where Catholics around the country could write somewhere, whether it's to the USCCB or to writers like you, and express their thoughts about certain issues so that bishops who are still discerning about what they want to do about certain issues could hear what the Catholic public is thinking. It's not that they would be making their decisions based on, they are the authority in their diocese, but still to know that there are many people who would believe in their authority and would be praying for them and supporting them and understanding if they were to do
directly.
such and
I
such.
don't think you should go through anyone. write directly to the bishops. They read their mail. Well, you know that. You told me about Archbishop Chaput. He wrote back to you.
Right, he reads his email.
Yeah, the bishops appreciate
But
hearing.
can you get the emails or the addresses of
I
all
don't
the
use
bishops?
email with bishops because I think that kind of gets lost.
So you'd
I write
send
real
200
letters.
letters out?
Yeah, I
You'd send
do. I know
letters.
old-fashioned letters.
Yeah.
I do, with a stamp and everything.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Can you say something about the criticism that the nuns are facing from the bishop's sanctions? Or is it
Yeah, the LCWR, the leadership, yes. And the nuns on the bus who are criticizing the bishops, they're the ones that have gotten all. But the leadership of Catholic Women Religious, this is long overdue criticism. Oh my gosh. You can't imagine what goes on. And I kind of hold the LCWR personally responsible for the state of most Catholic colleges and universities. Now, they're not to blame for all, but their ideas on feminism that include a woman's right to choose. I worked with nuns who were part of LCWR who were strongly pro-choice, including partial birth abortion. I've debated a nun at my school, Sister Mary. And she was in favor of abortion. Is that a good thing?
What was her name?
Sister Mary Holtz.
Sister Mary
Holtz.
Holtz.
Yes. Yeah, there are, we have at the university, she was publicly, so I mean, it's not like I'm telling secrets. If you look at any of these pro-choice feminist organizations in our church, the women are strong pro-choice advocates, and you can't have that with women religious. And the bishops are finally doing something. I don't know why it took them so long. And that's why I know they're going to address Catholic colleges. It may not be fast enough for me. My husband always says it never happens on your timeline. It doesn't. But they're doing it. And to go after the problems in this, Sister Claire Malaya was the one who led this visitation. A lovelier nun you have never met. I mean, she is so lovely. She's from Connecticut, a hardworking nun. And the bishops have tried to deal with these nuns pastorally, by counseling them, and they're just like in your face. They want to take over the church. I've always felt that, and they have really taken over Catholic higher education in a lot of schools, mine included at San Diego. And they're brilliant nuns, and some of them are good nuns. But you can't have pro-choice nuns, and you can't have nuns who think they're priests, who are celebrating masses, and you know a little bit about that in Rochester, a little more than you want to know. And by the way, in our book, we point out that when you have large numbers of women who think that they're priests or who act as pastors, that doesn't do a lot to encourage vocations. And I don't want to criticize you there. Yes?
You mentioned nuns on the bus. I saw a clip on TV about.
Oh, I know. Phoebe loves them.
Yeah. Well, what I noticed were most of them had white hair.
Yes.
Quite old. And in contrast, somebody was just on TV and they did a talk on the religious communities that are expanding.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if you talk about that in the book or you just concentrated on.
Yeah, well, it's the same within the dioceses that have Orthodox bishops end up with Sisters for Life, They're wonderful. There are lots of, now the USCCB, I'm very hopeful because they just put a nun in charge of education, K-12 and Catholic higher education. I forget her name, but she's out of Steubenville, which is a really solid Catholic university. She's going to be great. I'm going to write to her. I just haven't done it yet. She was just appointed, I think, last week. Marie Powers used to have the position. She was great, but not strong enough. This is a strong nun. And so, yeah, there are vocations to the priesthood and to religious orders when they're Orthodox. They're the ones that are growing. Those revolutionaries in Rockports, as they call themselves, they're an aging bunch. But the problem is, they're an aging bunch on my campus, but they're inspiring new students to follow them. That's what, like the Women's Ordination Conference, they put a young person in charge of, because they want to attract young women. And so it's not that they're going to die out, they're going to be replaced by other progressive revolutionaries that want to be ordained. Yes?
This is just a comment, and you kind of alluded to it in some of your words, but I think what is one positive thing that has happened, or is happening, that this administration is doing unintentionally, I'm sure, is bringing Orthodox Christians together.
You're right.
I'm looking over at that quote, "In this matter, we're all Catholics." I believe that was Mike Huckabee that said that.
An evangelical.
Yeah.
You're right. Absolutely. I've always felt that about the pro-life cause, that brought Catholics and evangelicals and some Orthodox Jews together, but this more than anything. The pro-life movement, like 40 Days for Life, do you have that up here, 40 Days for Life? Do you work with evangelicals or Protestant churches, or is it just Catholics? No.
Pretty much.
We don't even have really anything in Connecticut, but San Diego, because there's a huge evangelical community there. So they work together, you're right. And it's in our own church, it's giving us courage because there's other people like us. We're not alone. It is true. Any other, yes?
Christians, maybe Catholics in particular, I think hold their faith deeply, and we're somewhat subdued. We're reluctant to go out in the public square and talk about our faith, to defend our faith. And what the press has done with calling this 2 weeks of anger is they have turned the conversation away from the truth. We're not angry, we're professing the truth. And when we hear the truth, and when we hear things that aren't true, we have to confront the press. You have to call your local TV station manager when you've heard a newscast that's not true. We have to talk to newspapers, get appointments to see them, like Rhonda is doing. We have to get up and we have to be like St. Michael and defend our faith. And
You're right.
Until we do that, it's not going to matter. And we need people like you. We need people like the bishops that we have. We
need to learn from the evangelicals. They are not embarrassed to say if you accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. I can't imagine as a Catholic saying that to people. Most of us don't do that. But they're not shy. And we could learn a little bit from that this is wrong. And, and this is, I think that's why I agree with you when you say that this is a good thing. Really is, because I think it's getting us ready for the even bigger battles where we have to really be like, I love St. Michael. I have a big statue of St. Michael with his foot on Satan's head. I find it inspiring, and it is good to think in terms of St. Michael, because we are fighting a war. Yeah, Rhonda?
Well, I was thinking that probably we should close in a moment so you can get back and help with the tree cleanup and salvaging, and we know that you've got quite a trip coming up. I've got a couple of thoughts here. One is maybe we can figure out a way to bring the two of you back for a book signing not too long from now. Also, I'm thinking, you've got places that you live and travel back and forth to, from New York City to Connecticut and in the Boston area, but I know you also like the area here. I don't know if you need somebody that could be an honorary Redemptorist retreatant assistant here, but we do know some realtors. And we're not that far. I have something to present to you, and I will also tell you that I mistakenly, not knowing that no, I shouldn't say this. Okay, I'll just give this to you and I'll just tell you later. I'll just tell you privately later. This is a book that shows what the core team, again spearheaded by Deacon Claude, what Deacon had put together, which we wanted you to have to take home so that you can see some of our faces over and over again and see our community and the history of it again. And we want you to come back. So,
thank you. We would love to come back sometime. Maybe not in the winter. That's fine. But the best for the next few days of this. I know you're making a difference. I know you are. And don't worry about big crowds, because what does Pope Benedict say? We may become like a mustard seed church, you know, and that's okay, as long as it's on fire, really, because then it will grow. Thank you.
It's an announcement that okay. There's going to be a video at 3:15 and it's going to be Bella. Marguerite knows all about And you have you got to meet Philadelphia has a lot of Which one do you
Son's was there. Yes, it is.
You always see if I look away because well, it shows that
I stopped by. Thank you.
Did you meet him?